Well, there's been some major political fallout today from a CBC News Exclusive on Canada's electronic spy agency. A document obtained from the NSA whistleblower Edward Snowden reveals that CSEC tracked Canadians who used Wi-Fi services at a major Canadian airport. And CSEC continued to track the wireless devices of those airline passengers for days after they left the terminal. By law, CSEC is not allowed to target Canadians or anyone in Canada without a judicial warrant. It was the subject of question period today. Opposition parties hammered the government over the issue. So what is the political fallout? The CBC's Greg Weston broke this story and joins me now. Good to see you, Greg.
Rosie.
So it was a big topic in question period. We will get to some of those clips a little bit later. But first, explain to us what some of the reaction has been in terms of what we're seeing out there.
Well, we went around and collected some comments off the street, and people are frankly shocked that this would happen. I mean, you can imagine people walking through an airport, and these are Wi-Fi. The Wi-Fis are everywhere. They're in coffee shops and hotels,
yeah.
and so here they are walking through the airport one day, and unbeknownst to them, when that smartphone of theirs sends a signal to the Wi-Fi, it identifies that smartphone and whose it is and where it is. How are they to know that at some point a Canadian spy service would come along, scoop those up, and then use them to track them? So there was a sense of gee whiz, and then there was a sense of I don't think I like that. We didn't find a whole lot of people that said, boy, I'm really glad they're doing that.
Yeah, and I mean, you don't even have to tap into the Wi-Fi for this to have happened. So security experts have looked at these documents. What's their take?
Well, their take, as we reported, is very much it is as it appears, and that is that they were collecting this Wi-Fi, this data from people's cell phones at a Canadian airport. We're not sure which one, a major international airport, and then they were able to track them with this new software and supercomputers. They were able to track them as they intersected with other Wi-Fi systems all over that city, all across the country, and even as far as the United States. So this is a very intrusive technology. It's not supposed to be used on Canadians. CSEC, the agency that was doing this, has no mandate to spy on Canadians anywhere in the world, much less at one of their own airports. So the experts who had looked at these documents, and of course they listened to the government today and came back, and it didn't change their mind in the slightest.
So I know you've been speaking to some privacy commissioners, people worried about the way that CSEC might be tracking Canadians. Can you give us a sense of how they are reacting?
Well, they're saying the same thing that they always have, and the government's explanations today didn't help very much.
I think actually we have the clip now of the Minister of National Defence, Rob Nicholson. Let me show viewers that.
It's my understanding that CSEC made it clear to CBC that nothing in the documents that they had obtained showed that Canadian communications were targeted, collected, or used, nor that travelers' movements were tracked.
Well, that sounds pretty clear, pretty unequivocal, but here's the thing. One thing politicians do very well is they split hairs so that it sounds like one thing and means another. If we look very carefully at what the minister said, he said that CSEC was not collecting the communications of these travelers. Well, that's true. They weren't, because that would mean they were listening to their phone calls or reading their emails. They weren't. They were picking up the ID of those and turning them into basically personal beacons. So it's quite true they weren't hacking into their phones, but nobody said they were, so that's not really relevant. Secondly, he said their movements were not tracked. Well, the documents show very clearly going from a Wi-Fi to a hotel to a library to what was some of the other coffee shops, that sort of thing.
Hotels.
And so how do we square this? Well, the document actually says these people were followed. Well, they were tracked or they were followed, seriously. So the government really has not added, how should we put this, to the enlightenment of Canadians through this, but they're facing a potentially very large political problem here if this issue takes off, and if it becomes known that, in fact, the government sanctioned this, they've got a heap of problem.
Much like we saw in the United States as Obama had to make sort of changes as the story unfolded with the NSA. I think we have a clip of Chantal Bernier from the Privacy Commissioner's office expressing some of those concerns. Listen to that now.
People do not want to be tracked. People do not believe that their metadata is innocuous. And so we need to have a privacy regime that reflects those values.
She's saying what every other privacy expert is saying, and that is we need to know what exactly CSEC is up to. There needs to be a public debate about it. This is an agency that has lived in the shadows and prided itself in living in the shadows. Most Canadians didn't even know it existed till a couple months ago. It's been around for 70 years. So they're saying, let's have debate. Let's open the place up. Let's look at it. Well, good luck to that. It's not happening yet.
Thanks, Greg. I appreciate it. Thanks for the update. That's the CBC's Greg Weston. We heard there from Minister of Defence, Rob Nicholson. He referred to a statement from Canada's electronic spy agency that was released to the CBC. Let's show you a little bit of what CSEC actually had to say. It said that CSEC is legally authorized to collect and analyze metadata. You hear that word a lot. In simple terms, metadata is technical information used to route communications and not the contents of a communication. It is important to note that no Canadian or foreign travelers were tracked. No Canadian communication were or are targeted, collected, or used. So you know, we've posted these documents on cbcnews.ca. You can go have a look at them yourself and make up your own mind. But do you think this was an illegal activity, or is the gathering metadata harmless? Does there need to be more oversight of CSEC and its activities? Who is watching our spies? Joining me now from St. John's, Newfoundland, is NDP National Defence critic Jack Harris. And in Charlottetown is Wayne Easter, the Liberal public safety critic. We, of course, asked for a government minister or MP or anyone, frankly, to join our panel with government's perspective, but no one was made available. Okay, gentlemen, thank you for being here. Appreciate it.
Pleasure.
Let's start with you, Jack Harris. CSEC says they're legally authorized to collect and analyze metadata, that this is technical information. They are not looking at what people are doing, the phone calls they're making, the emails they're sending. In your view, do you think CSEC is breaking the law?
Well, first of all, it's pretty clear from the experts who understand how all this technology works that this is outside of their mandate. You got to, as Greg Weston pointed out, you got to carefully parse their words. The minister is only repeating the exact same words that CSEC is saying. They're not putting anyone on this program. This is part of the lack of transparency that worries Canadians. But it's pretty clear when they say they're not tracking individuals, they're not tracking Canadians. Well, they're certainly tracking the devices that are being carried around by Canadians. They know where they are. They know who they're communicating with, who they're emailing, who they're talking to. To say that we're not tracking the Canadians is really not telling the truth. Frankly, they're tracking the machines that they're using, and they're sharing that information with other agencies. This is clearly contrary to what their mandate is supposed to be. And we've come a long way from the time when the wiretap legislation was brought in, which says that you can't intercept someone's communication without having a warrant from a judge and be a police officer. Otherwise, you're actually breaking the criminal code. The technology that is advanced is allowing them to do this. The law clearly hasn't kept up with it, and clearly, as every privacy expert has said, including the two privacy commissioners in Ontario and in Ottawa, have said that there needs to be greater parliamentary oversight and transparency. These two agencies alone, CSIS and CSEC, their budget was $1 billion last year, $1 billion. They're doing a lot of stuff with that money. They're a very, very powerful agency. The more powerful they are, the more control they have, the more ability they have to be watchers like Big Brother, the more control there has to be. That's just not there.
On what you think has happened here in terms of the documents that Greg reported on last night and again just now, do you think that CSEC has done something it is not allowed to do, or do you think that metadata is fair game?
That question was to me, Rosie.
Yes, Wayne Easter, that's right, yeah.
Well, there's one of two things happened here. Either CSEC exceeded its legal mandate, or they did what they did with the full knowledge and authorization of the Minister of National Defence, and there is a section under the National Defence Act where some certain things can indeed happen. Mm-hmm. There's no question in my mind that there needs to be a parliamentary oversight. We will, in fact, use an opposition day on Tuesday in order to debate this issue further in the Parliament of Canada, where we'll be asking the government to acknowledge that they've exceeded, that they went over their mandate, and that we look at an oversight agency for CSEC, CSIS, and the other intelligence agencies.
But
actually, I was on Monday, on Tuesday last week.
Just to be clear, Wayne Easter, if the government has authorized something to take place, in this case, a 2-week trial of tracking Canadians in and out of airports at some airport, does that mean that CSEC overstepped its bounds if the government authorized it confidentially and we just don't know?
Well, in terms of our knowledge of what they're allowed to do, I would say they did, and what this goes to the heart of, in today's technological age and information, and everybody with cell phones, iPads, and you name it, then the surveillance has far expanded beyond what parliaments have done to protect people, and we're the only country really in the Five Eyes in the Western world that doesn't have a parliamentary oversight agency committee in a proactive way to watch what these agencies do and ensure that they do stay within the law.
Yeah.
I was at the Information Commissioners of Ontario's workshop and panel on Tuesday, where privacy issues and these kind of things were talked about, and there's other examples beyond this.
Sure.
I mean, if an individual in Toronto sent a packet of information electronically across the street, it's possible that information could have went to Chicago and New York and then back to Toronto.
Yeah, okay.
Other agencies could surveil that information. So this is a very, very serious issue.
Okay, let me, if I can, I know that there's no Conservative on this panel, unfortunately, but let me show viewers a little bit of what the Minister of Defence, Rob Nicholson, said today. He said that Canadians' privacy is not at risk. Take a listen.
There is legislative measures in place to protect the privacy of Canadians, and CSEC must adhere to those. I can tell him what the independent CSEC commissioner said that the CSEC chiefs have spared no effort to instill within CSEC a culture of respect for the law and for the privacy of Canadians. I can say with pride and confidence that CSEC is truly being watched.
So, Jack Harris, let me get you to react to that, and whether this issue of whether there's enough oversight of CSEC, and whether, frankly, parliamentarians have been a little bit asleep at the wheel when it comes to protecting Canadians' privacy, because no one seems to have managed to put anything substantial in place.
Well, parliamentarians generally, I suppose, if you look at the Privacy Act, it was put into place in 1983, and the privacy that Canadians expect to have. If you borrow a book from the library, the police officers can't find out what book you borrowed unless they get a search warrant from a judge to go and look at those records. Yet we have the ability now through technology of all sorts of surveillance to go on, and apparently the information that's being collected, the government is authorizing it in some cases. In other cases, we don't know. There has been efforts to try and take control of this. I introduced a motion back in October asking us to set up a committee to ensure that we had some sort of modern parliamentary oversight. The government said, no way, we're not going to agree with that. So there are ways to do it. There was legislation proposed in 2005, for example, which died on the order paper, and other various steps. But this government has said it's not interested. Frankly, it keeps repeating these lines, which claim, for example, that the privacy of Canadians is CSEC's #1 priority. That's laughable in the face of what we're hearing about today.
Rosie, Minister Nicholson is wrong in a statement that he just made in their house there. The commissioner did, in fact, in a report, I'm not sure if it was the last one or the one before it, said August. It was possible that CSEC had violated the law. He couldn't determine that, but it was possible. And the fact of the matter is, yes, parliamentarians in general have put forward the need for a parliamentary oversight agency. This government has refused. In fact, I sat on a committee authorized by then Public Security Minister Anne McClellan in 2004, where we tabled a report that was unanimously agreed to by all parties, and in came legislation to, in fact, bring forward a parliamentary oversight agency. On that committee was Peter MacKay and Kevin Sorensen's two current ministers, and Joe Cole-Martin, who's the Deputy Speaker of the House, and myself. Derek Lee brought that legislation forward as private member's bill, and the government wouldn't act on it. And now I have that bill before Parliament entitled C551, and we'll be asking the government on Tuesday to endorse that legislation and allow that parliamentary oversight to take place for the protection of Canadians.
Okay, well, I know we've just had a very cursory talk about what has to happen. We will talk more about it next week. I appreciate you both being here. Thanks very much. Have a good weekend, gentlemen.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Thanks. Again, we did ask for a Conservative MP or a minister to discuss this story, but no one was made available. Welcome back. We've got more now on the CBC Exclusive story Greg Weston brought us earlier, that top-secret operation targeting the Wi-Fi service at a major Canadian airport. It was launched by the Communications Security Establishment Canada, Canada's electronic spy agency, and CSEC, as it's known, along with the government, say no Canadian communications were targeted. But was CSEC's operation a violation of privacy? Did it break Canadian law? Joining me now from Vancouver is Kaylee DePuma, counsel for the BC Civil Liberties Association, with her take. Good to see you. Appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
Some might think that these things are shocking, that this is shocking, but CSEC says, listen, we were looking at metadata. We weren't looking at anyone's private communications, private emails, and from that perspective, we're allowed to sort of track movement. What's your thoughts?
We say that's absolutely unreasonable. It's an unacceptable intrusion into Canadians' privacy rights and their ability to express themselves freely. What we're talking about here is dragnet surveillance of anyone, anytime, anywhere, and we say it's unconstitutional and contrary to the Charter of Rights and Freedoms.
But how does it violate their privacy in terms of communication? Because they didn't, if you believe them, I guess, they didn't pick up anything that was being said. What they did was track where you went from the airport, whether you went to a hotel or a cafe. And in the documents, which I'm sure you've seen, and if people want to look at them, they're on our website, they actually use the example of trying to find someone who's kidnapped, a child or something. And this is a way for them to sort of target where that person has gone.
We say that metadata is private information about Canadians. It can tell the government all sorts of intimate details about our personal life, our relationships with other people, our movements, our political affiliations, our religious choices, even our sexual orientation. This is private information collected over time that gives a profile of an individual, and that is contrary to Section 8 of the Charter, and it ultimately causes Canadians to begin to censor themselves in what would be ordinary speech day to day, and it should be found to be unconstitutional.
So do you not think that a spy agency, though, has the right to track individuals so that they can prevent terrorism, prevent crime, those kinds of things?
Well, absolutely. If there's targeted efforts based on a particular individual, you could see that those would be more justifiable in certain circumstances. Here, though, what we have is a concrete example of dragnet surveillance, where they create a haystack where all of our personal information is thrown into a database, and they just get to decide whether or not there's something of use for it down the road in the future. But what it ultimately means is that our government is tracking us like the police tail a suspect. And in ordinary circumstances, they would need a judicial warrant to do that. And here they're doing it with no authorization at all.
According to these documents, this was, I guess, a 2-week trial that they did from some major airport that's not identified. Do you think that this is something more systematic, or do you think that this was just CSEC testing out their capabilities?
This is just one example of CSEC's metadata collection. We know that the Minister of National Defence first issued a directive authorizing CSEC to collect metadata information back in 2005. They issued it again in 2011. Clearly, there are more programs of this type. This is just the first real concrete example that we have, and it shows the Canadian people exactly what this could mean for our personal liberties.
You have filed a lawsuit against the government regarding CSEC and the collection of data. Where is that at? Where would you expect it to be? Because one of the problems with CSEC is we don't really know all the details of what they're doing. The only reason we know this is because Edward Snowden leaked documents from the United States. So, how do you proceed in a lawsuit against CSEC if you don't really know what's happening?
It is difficult. The government has filed a response to our lawsuit earlier this month, and as we understand it, we're starting the documentary discovery process, and we expect that the government will assert national security privilege over much of the evidence that the court needs to hear this dispute, and we hope that the court will decide to have an open airing of this issue and will decide in our favor as we move forward.
Kaylee DePuma, thank you very much. Appreciate your perspective on this important story.
Thank you.
That's Kaylee DePuma of the BC Civil Liberties Association.